Hello, everyone. Matt Rule here. I'm going to be talking to you today about formative and summative assessments in terms of data collection and some things that are involved with that based on best practices and ways to collect that data from your students as part of a research study. The first portion I'm going to talk about is just a description of what those two components are. I know as educators we're probably relatively familiar with what they are, but just to go over that once again, formative assessment is basically an assessment for learning. And what that looks like is formative assessments are taken during the learning process to identify any learning gaps and need for remediation for your students. So if any of them are falling behind, a lot of that is going to be discovered through formative assessment, and then those appropriate adjustments can be made as you as the teacher are trying to get them all on the same page as they move towards completion of a unit or topic, whatever that looks like in your classroom. As you approach the end of the unit, it is going to become a summative assessment, and what that is in comparison to a formative is its assessment of learning. So formative is for learning that you can adapt the items to your students. And then assessment of learning would fall under the summative category, and that uses student learning and tests that at the culmination of a unit or topic. So it checks for comprehension and understanding after you have hopefully made some adjustments throughout the unit to best suit and help your students to get to those learning objectives there at the end. So that's just a general description of those two topics. Moving on to processes and procedures. Some examples of what some of these could look like from the readings that were talked about were teacher-made tests. So whether you are generating the tests and coming up with the material yourself, or if you would be using some pre-made tests based on the curriculum that you're working through. You can also do pre and post testing if you're trying to determine any growth aspects throughout your study. You can do a pre and post testing format. It's also important that these data collection techniques be supplemented with other data as well, and not solely rely on assessment data. That was found from the excuse me, Mertler readings. So if you are going to do some type of assessment, it's important or recommended by Mertler that you do some type of supplementive data collection as well, that you're not only relying on the testing data. So that's something that was recommended from the readings. In terms of data type and questions, the formative and summative testing would definitely fall under the quantitative data collection method because it is numbers based rather than words based, as it talked about in the readings. And this method would answer basic achievement improvements through pre and post testing as an option. So whether you are, like I said before, testing for growth measurements, you can do a pre-test to get a baseline and then do a post-test afterwards to see the amount of growth that the students obtained after receiving the content that you presented to them. Another option would be formative assessments, would identify learning gaps that can be addressed during the learning process and any remediation or adjustments that need to be made. So having formative assessments throughout the process can give the teacher insight as to where the students are as a group or individually. And finally, summative assessments would then show student achievement and understanding of the content. So at the end or culmination of a unit, you'd be able to gauge how well the students comprehended the material at the conclusion of that unit. In terms of strengths and weaknesses based on this data collection technique, there are several strengths associated with this, which it provides teachers with immediate feedback rather than needing to create transcripts of different interviews or anything like that. When you are dealing with assessments, it does provide instant feedback for the teacher based on the results that are shown. It shows student comprehension of the content, so how well they are understanding what you're trying to teach them. And, whoops, sorry. And it increases student awareness of their learning. Um, by allowing them to see the results mainly through the formative assessments and how they're progressing. And it can also increase student motivation. Some weaknesses: it can be time consuming to modify teaching techniques and provide remediation for those struggling students. So that can be somewhat time consuming. And also, another time consuming aspect would be providing detailed feedback to students on those formative assessments to truly help them progress to where you would want them to be. So, mainly the component of time are drawbacks in this type of data collection. For validity, if utilizing testing for achievement analysis, it is important that the assessment consists only of questions directly related to the topic being assessed. If there are questions that do not pertain to the topic of study, then those questions should be discarded from the exam or not included in the total tally when you are composing or compiling, I should say, the results from your study. And a valid test always is reliable, whereas a reliable test is not always valid, and that's also from the Mertler readings. For reliability and ethics, based upon formative and summative assessment, if you do pre and post test administration to make sure that you can check for consistency, that's one way to do that. You can also conduct your own internal consistency test by using the Kruder-Richardson Formula 21. That was pulled from the readings as well, and that's shown in the formula right below. And another option is to make sure, in terms of ethics, that it's important to keep student identities concealed when dealing with testing and academic results as part of a research study. That does apply for many different data collection techniques, and it also, as you can see, does apply when in the field of testing. So it's important that you do conceal student identities when presenting your information. Overall, I think that data collection in the form of formative and summative assessments is something that's going to be really helpful for me in my study in particular. And I'm looking forward to incorporating that into my study. And I hope you guys all found this information interesting and usable. Thank you.